Welcome to this session of our How to Paint Skies and Clouds course. In this session, we're going to be almost 100% focused on the sky. There are a few clouds in this scene, but not nearly as many as there will be in future sessions. We're going to be focusing on the sky because the sky, whether you're focused on the land or the sky in your landscape painting, the sky is where all of the light is. The light comes from the sky. And so that's one thing as you're thinking about painting and designing your skies in your landscapes, they have to look like they are full of light, right? And that's a challenge because we don't paint with light, we paint with paint. And what I'd like to do today is show you the value structure, which is how light or dark something is, and the color techniques that I use to create that sense of light in the sky. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I'm going to show you every stroke. Of course, it is my goal to show you the first and the last stroke of this painting. So over the next 3 hours, we're going to go through all of it. I'm going to be sharing my process and all the unique little challenges that come up along the way. I'm going to be explaining what I'm doing and why I'm doing what I'm doing, the problem solving that's happening, but with a really big focus on making the sky not look like it's, the wall painted behind me, but light, right? That's the challenge. Here we go. Our source, just for those of you who are curious, this is in the foothills of the Bridger Mountains near Bozeman, looking southwest toward other mountains whose names I can't quite remember. So this is out in Montana, big mountains far away, and just a big, beautiful sky. You can see the bands of the color in the sky. This this color that you see fading from really sort of a violet blue at the top to pink at the bottom. There are a couple of reasons why it's happening. And it is the first of all, the atmosphere. So if you think you look straight up above you, if you look straight into the sky above your head, you are looking out of the bubble of our atmosphere into outer space, right? The closer you look to the horizon line, the more atmosphere you are looking through, right? So you're looking through the atmosphere at its thinnest when you look straight up, looking across the atmosphere, if you will, looking across that bubble of atmosphere, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And you can see that reflected in the values in the sky. Typically, the sky gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So if you squint, it's getting a little bit lighter as it comes down. And that's why. Now, this all depends on the position of the sun, too. There's something called the belt of Venus, and it's just a name for the shadow of the earth cast out onto the atmosphere. And so if the sun is in the west setting behind you and you're looking east right before the sun disappears, a dark band of gray violet actually starts to appear above the horizon line, literally the shadow of the earth. And so, that's depending on the sun, this will all change. Now, speaking of depending on the sun, I want to show you this value source here. You can see it's a little bit exaggerated in this reference, but it's lighter on the right and darker as you go to the left. And that is showing the position of the sun. The sun is to the right. So not only do we have a gradient of color and value, ever so slight, from top to bottom. Sometimes it's much more extreme than we have here, but you also have a gradient from near the sun to away from the sun. And those are two big things that you can always consider when you're getting ready to paint a sky. There are going to be gradients. There's going to be a gradient from the zenith to the horizon, and there's going to be a gradient from the sun away from the sun. All right. So those are some considerations. And I am going to show you, I think it's definitely going to be easier just to show you in paint So what we're going to do is we're just going to start the process. We're going to start this painting, and I'm going to do that by taking you over to the palette. Now, just for those of you who haven't seen this palette before, this is my bismuth yellow. You can use cadmium lemon, cadmium yellow pale, Hansa yellow light, permanent yellow, Windsor yellow, any of those really, really bright, fresh looking yellows, not an orangey sort of, yeah, orangey yellow, but a yellow yellow. That's what I'm using here with the bismuth. And then gold ochre. And substitutes for gold ochre, really the best one would be yellow ochre, but yellow ochre is not nearly as orangey as gold ochre is. Gold ochre is really a very uniquely orange earth tone yellow, and I just love it. It's so useful. So gold ochre here. These are all Holbein colors, by the way. Eye roll, and pyrrole is a replacement for cadmium red light. So you can use cad red light, naphthol scarlet, vermilion, any of those sort of fire engine reds will work here. Here is alizarin, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, viridian, transparent red oxide. And again, maybe that's a little bit more of an obscure color. You can use burnt sienna there as well. I do use quick drying white. I'm going to show it to you, but I don't squeeze it out until I'm ready to start. This little color wheel in the middle is just so that we can talk about complementary color. It's a little bit dirty. I need to repaint it at some point, but they're still present enough for the case to be made. And then I have a value scale over here with the mineral spirits down in the corner that I use in the beginning of the painting to tone the canvas and then cover. But that's it. We're ready to start. So the very first step, those of you who are painting along, here we go. This is going to be the very first step. So I am going to take my large number 12 filbert brush and dip it in my mineral spirits. You can use whatever thinner works best for you, but I'm dipping it in my mineral spirits and putting just enough transparent red oxide in there to create this very thin stain. So here we go. And I'm just going to spread that out over my panel. The goal here is to create a thin film that really soaks into the panel, and what doesn't soak in evaporates. So this will be basically dry to the touch very shortly. And when I'm working in the studio, I love to start with this warm sort of orangey tone because it is going to help me keep my painting warm all the way through. I just find starting on just a bare yellow, or I'm sorry, a bare white canvas, I I tend to get a little too cold in the studio. So I really do prefer to start with this more orange tone, and it just basically because every dot of color you put down or I put down is some gray or color in this field of orange, it forces a compensation, sort of an overcompensation to warm. And the finished project is nice and warm. Okay. So I do this very often, not always, and you certainly don't always have to do it to have successful paintings, but it's a good place to start. We're getting ready to start the underpainting phase, but this is just the stain. One other thing that this does, if we think about value, is it allows me to find my lightest light and my darkest dark rather than having my lightest light always that bone white canvas, right? So it makes finding values a little bit easier too.
Jim, quick question.
Sorry. Oh,
I just wondered what size canvas you're using.
9 by 12.
Thanks.
Tim, do you know the lighting, how many lumens by chance your studio has, and or do you use studio lighting lamps?
So I have can lights in my studio ceiling, and they are, I think, 1600 lumens a piece. They're really, really bright. Um, so that, and they're daylight. That's the temperature that I found was the best daylight. So not cold, but not warm. I'm drawing thirds on here, by the way, too. And if I don't have those, so the times that I've moved studios before I could have can lights installed, um, an LED array pointed at the ceiling, so that it's not aimed directly at my painting, but pointed at the ceiling, sort of 145 degrees out in either direction from my painting. That works well too.
Makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, good question. Studio lighting is quite a thing. I didn't know it was a thing until I came home after my very first semester studying painting at college, and then I came home and tried to set up and paint in my room at home, and there's like 140-watt light bulb in there or something I couldn't see, and it was the first time I realized that I'd been living in the dark all that time. um Good lighting's important. Okay, so here we are. We're ready to do the next step. So this step is just tone, and I put the rule of thirds on there because it's just so helpful to have, right? The rule of thirds, if you've had a chance to watch the little video, it's only 5 minutes on Edgar Payne's compositions that I created for this course. It's there for you to find if you haven't seen it yet. The rule of thirds is just such an essential way of finding your way through how to compose a painting. Now, in our case, I already have the composition. So let me just shift over here, and this is going to be our composition. It's pretty simple, right? We don't have any big complicated trees or barns or anything like that, but let's take a moment and get these shapes on to this panel. And I want to stress that this stage where you get the composition laid out in an underpainting is very, very important. You don't ever want to rush this part. This part you want to really get right. And this is because this is the foundation of your painting. Now, it isn't that there isn't forgiveness and wiggle room here and there along the way as you continue the painting, and little things that you can tweak. But if you get this part majorly wrong, it's just going to make everything else really difficult. So sort of have my own personality is to kind of rush into painting. Like I'm just so eager to start painting. So it's taken years and years to discipline myself to really take this part slow and make sure that I know where I'm going before I start. So I'm going to take you back to my palette. And now I have a number 6 filbert, so half the size of the brush before, and still a little bit of mineral spirits, but not so much that it's running, right? It's transparent red oxide, and it's not quite like that melted butter. It's just before that. So it's not tube consistency, but it's not going to run down the palette and drip off my painting anymore either. So that's kind of the consistency we're looking for. And here we go back to this. I'm going to put the little composition in the corner, right-hand corner. And I'm going to start copying it. It's a pretty easy place to start with just, we can just kind of trace along this third, right? Because we know that the bottom of the painting right here is on that third. And that's actually really the top of the mountain. So the darker below the mountains is just a little bit below that third line. Another reasonably straight line there. And just because we know that the value is going to be altogether darker, but not terribly dark, right? So it's not going to be black or anything, but I'm just going to kind of like you would do with a marker or a piece of charcoal, just kind of give this a tone, scrub this paint in so I can start to build the values of the scene, and the mountains are not quite as dark. Now, this is not super accurate as far as value. It's just an idea, right? We're going to get super accurate with our values when we start with opaque paint. We're still using tone, so it's just not quite, we're not quite committed to the values yet. We don't need to worry about them, but the idea of the value structure is nice to have. And I'm also going to take a little bit of mineral spirits on a paper towel and just get rid of these third lines. Now that, they've served their purpose, we found our horizon line. I don't want to have to deal with trying to cover those really strong lines up in the sky. So I'm just going to remove them. There we go. Just erased. There's the ghost of those lines are still there. So it's not like I can't somewhat reference them. For instance, I remember the mountain, we had it dip down here. I moved that dip from this side of the picture to this side on this third to make a stronger design. Okay. And now I'm looking to sort of latch on to some things here that I know I can put in. I'm going to put in this sort of a tree line here. I'm not looking at the photograph. I'm just looking at that design that I have displayed in the upper right-hand corner. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I find that my paintings are always stronger when I come up with the design and I copy the design first, not the photograph first, right? So even if you do take the time to do thumbnails and work out a design, and then you sort of put the design next to your photograph, the power of the photograph to sort of draw you back into itself, and you end up just kind of morphing your nice design, whatever it was, back into what the photograph is, away from that good design. And so I've found that it's good not to look at photographs in this stage. So the process that I have is to create that thumbnail. You can do it with graphite or marker or pen or um, charcoal, whatever you're most comfortable with. You can do it on the computer if you love using Procreate or something like that. But once you have that design, copy that design onto your panel like you're doing a master copy.
Can I ask a question, Tim?
Go ahead.
The um, composition design on your upper right corner looks to me like you did that on the computer. Is that an abstraction from the original photograph?
Yes, yeah. What I did was I did it on the computer and moved some of these shapes around. So if you look, for instance, to the left where the mountains dip on the left, there's sort of that valley opening
Yes.
where the clouds are. That looked sort of like it just looked like it was a mimic of those clouds too much. So I moved it over to the other side and
Uh-huh.
then rearrange some of the lines in the trees on the right side too. And then because it's Photoshop, it was easy just to simplify some values too. So the value pattern is a lot more simple here than it is in the photograph.
And do you have a recommendation for how to learn to use Procreate or Photoshop to do that?
Um, yeah, So it really I have sort of come to this by playing around with it. So I don't really have a program that I would recommend. I think that the best thing that you can do, this is really an extension for me of just using graphite and markers in the studio. Um, Photoshop's nice because especially when it comes to teaching, I can share something where the values are exactly what I want them to be and things like that. But um so I don't know what I would recommend other than to say it's a course that I really want to teach at some point, Photoshop for the painter, right? Because there are a lot of things that you don't really need to worry about with Photoshop. There are a lot of buttons that I never push and I don't even know what they are. But the tools that I do use just make this kind of design easy
Gotcha.
by comparison.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And Michelle, you have your hand up.
Is there ever a case where the sky is darker than the landscape? Um, in reading Edgar Payne's book, I did get a copy of that at one point as I've been studying with you this year, and it's really helped my understanding of how to break down a landscape that I'm looking at, or that I'm planning a painting for. But in this case of a sunset, will there ever be or even in like the case of weather, I guess with dark storm clouds, is there ever a time when cloud shadows are darker than the ground plane?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And there are, right? And this is something that really, I think, taps into our just instinctive understanding of the landscape. Because if you see a scene where the sky is darker than the land, it typically has a very ominous feeling to it, right? So, um, if you have a really dark bank of clouds, like that rich slate gray kind of storm, and then there's a shaft of light coming in front of it on the land will be lighter than that bank of clouds. Now, the land won't be lighter than the sun that's shining on it, right? So there's still that relationship. But yes, you can get a layered stormy, I associate this with autumn, the fall of the year and just how sort of rainy and stormy and dark that time of year can get. And yes, you can have in situations like that. Also, if you have snow on the ground, even a sunny day, you think of really pristine blue skies in those alpine mountain paintings, and the snow is lighter than the sky. So in a situation like that, but almost always you're going to have a sky that's lighter. It's a lighter mass than anything in the landscape. And then, of course, the sun itself is always the lightest. There's no competition with the sun ever under any circumstances. There's no brighter light. Um, and so that's the answer to that question. Yeah, you can have an exception, and usually it means a storm or there's something like really light colored sand or snow or maybe ripe wheat or something like that, where a very light local value and color coupled with a dark sky can produce that exception.
Thank you. So you would say then that Edgar Payne's or the how you would number the values 1, 2, 3, 4 with the sky being the lightest, that is just a general rule. Um,
Yeah, and that
okay.
that actually, I don't know if that came from Payne or Carlson. I know
Oh,
it's in
maybe
Carlson's
it
Guide
was
to
probably
Landscape Paintings.
Carlson. Yeah, you're right. It's Carlson's. I got it confused. Yes.
And he does talk about those exceptions too. So
I'll have to
yes,
go back
it
and look.
is.
Okay.
Yeah, there definitely are exceptions, but the saying goes, the exceptions prove the rule. Almost always that sky is going to be the lightest mass. Almost always. Okay, so we don't have as complex a design as we will in some of the compositions that we're working on, but it is necessary, at least for me, in this process to lay out this much. So now I know where everything's going to go. Particularly, I know where these dark trees, these short little trees that are sort of pushing down the hillside. And speaking of the hillside, even with this underpainting, I'm starting to get a sense of that hill going down, right? So this is looking like it should. It's looking like the design. And now it's time to start in with the next step, the next layer, which is going to be actual opaque paint on the panel. So that's the exciting next step, and we're ready to go.